Good morning and welcome back to my class. In today's class, we are going to discuss the limitations of GDP as a measure of welfare. Now, what is welfare? Welfare means increase in the living standard of the people of the country. That means they are consuming more goods and services, and they are consuming more of material things. That means increasing the material well-being of the people reflects the welfare of the people. So that is why GDP is considered as a measure of welfare of the people. So it is said that when the GDP of a country is rising, it leads to increase in living standard of the people, and when the living standard of the people rises, the welfare also increases. So that is why it is often said that GDP is a measure of welfare. And why is it said so? Because when GDP of a country increases, so GDP is the sum total of the value of goods and services which are produced in the country. That means value of goods and services increase, and when the value of goods and service increase, it means the producers are producing more goods, so production also increase. And when producers will produce more goods and services, they will employ more workers, so it will lead to employment generation and income. So due to rise in production, employment generation will increase as well as income of the people will increase. And what happens when we get more income? When we get more money, we will go to the market to buy goods and services. So in that case, consumption will also increase, and more consumption means more satisfaction. We consume goods and services because it provides satisfaction to us. So when the consumption will increase, satisfaction level of the people will also increase. And with the increase in satisfaction level, the welfare of the country, the people who are residing in the country, will also rise. That is why GDP is often considered as an index of welfare. But in modern times, there are several economists who assert that GDP is not a satisfactory measure of welfare. Because what happens is, there are several things which are included in the GDP, but they do not increase the welfare of the people. So these must be excluded from the GDP numbers to get the correct picture of the welfare. In the same way, there are several other things which are not included in the GDP numbers, but they lead to rise in welfare of the people of the country. So that means their value should be included in the GDP so that we can measure the welfare level. So that is why in modern times, several economists say that GDP cannot be considered as a satisfactory measure of welfare of the people. So we are going to discuss several limitations which restricts the GDP as a measure of welfare. So first of them is distribution of income. So first limitation of GDP as a measure of welfare is distribution of GDP. And what is GDP? GDP is the income of the people residing in the country. So distribution means how the GDP or income which is generated in the country in the form of wages, rent, interest and profit is distributed among the people. So what happens is that if with the increase in GDP, the gap between the rich and poor is increasing, that means the welfare of the society as a whole is not increasing. So what happens is that when GDP rises, but major portion of this rise in the GDP goes in the hand of rich people. So what will happen? Rich will become richer and poor will remain at the same place where they were earlier, or they can become poorer also. So what will happen? The poor is remaining at the same place, however the rich people are becoming richer and richer. So the income gap between rich and poor keeps on rising. So when GDP rise and major portion of GDP goes to the rich people, then the gap between poor and rich will rise. Suppose these lines represent the gap between the income of the rich and poor. So when the GDP, with the increase in GDP, this gap between the incomes of poor and rich increases. It means the welfare is not there in the society. Welfare is not increasing in the society because most of the population which is poor is not getting more money due to the increase in GDP. But if with the increase in GDP, suppose GDP rises, and with the rise in GDP, the gap between the poor and the rich keeps on decreasing. That means when this rise in GDP, the major portion of this rise in GDP goes in the hand of poor people, so that their living standard increases. They can buy more goods and services. So what will happen? The welfare of a large part of the population will increase. In that case, the welfare of the country as a whole will also increase. So when the GDP rises, the income gap between the poor and rich decreases. In that case, GDP is a measure of correct measure of welfare. So what is happening here? Welfare is decreasing. So GDP does not reflect welfare. However, here the welfare of the people is increasing because income gap is decreasing. So that is why GDP is the correct measure of welfare. But what happens is that while estimating the GDP, this income inequality is not taken into account. So it is not possible to check whether this income gap is increasing or this income gap is decreasing, due to which GDP is not a correct measure of determining the welfare of the people. And we will look into the data which is reflecting the income inequalities in our country.
This chart has been prepared on the basis of survey done by Chancellor and Thomas Piketty, and it reflects the data of regarding the share of top 1% of the population in the total national wealth of our country. This data starts from the year 1922 till 2012. In 1922, overall almost 13% of the national wealth was possessed by the top 1% of the population. Now, the study suggests that income inequality in India declined sharply between 1950s and 1980s. Now, you can see that there is a sharp decline in the income of the top 1% of the population, and around 1984 it was the lowest. Around 7% of the income of the country was held by the top 1% of the population, and thereafter it has been rising continuously, and in the year 2012 the top 1% of the population of the country possessed 22% of the national wealth. Now, this information I have taken from Wikipedia. It says that Credit Suisse's Global Wealth Data Book for 2014 reports that bottom 10% of the Indian society owned merely 0.2% of the national wealth. You can see the first row of this table that says bottom 10% of the social class, and the wealth share is 0.2%. And you can see also the last row of this table, that is top 10% possess 77% of the total wealth. And the latest data which has been released by Oxfam India, this news was published in Business Today on January 30, 2019. It says that income inequality gets worse. India's top 1% bags 73% of the country's wealth. It says that, okay, earlier till 2012, the top 1% was holding around 22% of the national wealth, which has been increased in the year 2018 to 73%. That means with the increase in GDP, the gap between poor and rich is increasing. It is not reducing. It is been increasing constantly. So that is why even if GDP of India is increasing, it does not reflect the welfare of the country, because the gap between rich and poor is also increasing with the increase in GDP.
So as we have seen in this chart that in India, income inequality is there between the rich and poor. Top 73%, top 1% of the population is holding the 73% of the wealth. That means if we can present it in a form of a sketch, then the top 1% of the population is holding almost 73% of the wealth of the nation. And the rest of the people, rest of the population is holding just 27%. So top 1% of the population is holding 73% of the population. So that means in India, income inequality is there. That is why GDP cannot measure the welfare of the people. The farmers are still poor. They are still taking their lives because of the debt trap. And rich people are becoming richer and richer. So that is why, due to the problem of distribution of GDP in our country, GDP cannot be considered as a accurate or valid measure of welfare. Second limitation is composition of GDP. That means second is composition of GDP. Composition of GDP means what all goods and services are being produced in a country. There are some goods and services which increase the welfare of the society, and there are some goods and services which do not affect the welfare of the society, or they decrease the welfare of the society. So if those goods are being produced which increases the welfare of the society, then it can be said that okay, with the increase in GDP, welfare is also increasing. But if destructive goods are being produced in the country, in that case they are not increasing the welfare of the people. That is why increase in GDP could not be considered as a increase in welfare of the society. So there are two types of commodities which are being produced. One is consumption or investment goods. Consumption goods or investment goods. Consumption goods are those goods which we consume like fooding, clothing and housing. And there are several other things which we consume on a daily basis. Like we use lot of electronic items at our place. We use car, we use vehicles. So these are the consumption goods, and they directly satisfy our wants, human wants. That is why they increase the welfare of the people. If we are using a car, we feel good while driving the car or while riding the car. So that means I'm feeling good. That means my welfare is being increased. So with the increase of the if the GDP, major portion of the GDP consists of consumption goods, in that case welfare of the people or the society as a whole is increasing. In the same way, investment goods are increasing. Investment goods leads to the increase in the productive capacity of the country. So if producers are making more investments for the production of goods which satisfy our human wants and increase our welfare, then the welfare of the society increase with the GDP, increase in the GDP. So when the increase in consumption good and investment goods leads to the increase in GDP, then GDP could be considered as a measure of welfare, because it will lead to increase in welfare of the people as we are consuming more goods and services. On the other hand, there are some destructive goods like warhead goods. Warhead goods like production of guns, production of bombs. These are the goods which does not lead to increase in welfare of the society. We are not going to use those guns. We are not going to use those bombs for us. They will be used in during the wartime, and they will be used for the destruction. So if the increase in GDP is because of the increase in production of warhead goods, then GDP will not lead to welfare. So what happened? If production of warhead goods are increasing, due to which GDP is increasing, then welfare will decline. It will not rise. More guns are being produced in the country, and somewhere they will lead to destruction, either in the war place or even in the society also. So that means if production of these goods are increasing, then welfare of the society as a whole is decreasing. So it also depends that whether how GDP is increasing, by producing consumption and production goods or by increasing destructive goods. So that is why, since there is no bifurcation in measuring in the data of the GDP, as this is for good, this is for the consumption purpose and this is for the destruction purpose. So that is why GDP cannot be considered as a measure of welfare. Now, third limitation is price change, due to which the GDP cannot be considered as a measure of welfare. So third is price changes. Price changes may lead to rise in price or fall in price. So if the prices of the commodities are rising or falling continuously in a country, then GDP will also fluctuate. With the fluctuation of the prices, GDP will also fluctuate, and in that case we will not be able to understand whether this increase or decrease in the GDP is due to increase or decrease in the prices, or increase and decrease in the production of goods and services. So price rise means situation when there is a inflation in the country, and price falls lead to deflation. In last lecture, we had discussed nominal GDP and real GDP. So, nominal GDP of 2018-19 was 22,500. It was 22,500 for the year 2018 and 19. And 2019-20, it doubled to 45,000. But the quantity of goods and services remained same. That wheat was we took an example of wheat and cloth. Since wheat was 1000 in the year 2000, 1000 kg and it was 500 meter, and here also it was 1000 kg and it was cloth was 500 meter. However, the price of wheat in the year 2018-19 was rupees 10 and price of cloth was rupees 25. And here the price of wheat rose to rupees 20 and price of cloth rose to rupees 50. So the GDP rose from 22,500 to 45,000. So, but there was no increase in the production of goods and services. The quantity produced in the country remained same. So, till the time we do not adjust inflation or change in prices in the measuring GDP cannot be considered as a correct measure of measuring the welfare of the society. So, price changes also limits the function of GDP as a measure of welfare. Then fourth is non-monetary exchanges. Non-monetary exchanges are those exchanges for goods and services in which money is not used as a medium of exchange. In today's world also, at village level, there are several items which are exchanged for each other. Suppose there are two neighbors residing in a village in India. So what happens is that one village person produces wheat, the other one weaves the cloth. What they do, they exchange wheat and cloth without using any money. In the same way, there are several functions which are done by there are several work which are done by the females or housewives in their homes, like cooking food for the family, cleaning work done by them, or teaching their own children. So these are the work which cannot be estimated. It's not possible to get the correct value of these non-monetary exchanges in the economy. So that is why their value is not added while estimating the national income of the country. So that is why if non-monetary exchanges are more in a country, so number of non-monetary exchanges are large in a country, in that case GDP cannot be considered as a correct measure of welfare. Because if non-monetary exchanges are more, that means more welfare is being generated. The people who are exchanging goods like wheat and cloth, the person who is consuming wheat, that person is also getting welfare or getting satisfaction, and welfare is being increased. In the same way, the person who exchanged wheat for cloth, that means he is consuming cloth, he or she will also get the satisfaction and welfare will increase. However, the value of this exchange or this welfare has not been included in the GDP of the country. In the same way, housewife who is cooking the food for the family, the welfare of the family is increasing. They are getting the satisfaction by eating the food. But this value is not included in the estimation of the GDP. That means GDP is underestimated. And there are several values which needs to be added to the GDP and they have not been added. So if non-monetary exchanges are more in the country, that means GDP is underestimated and it is not the correct measure of welfare. That means in that case, welfare will be greater than the GDP of the country. So that is why when we should consider that non-monetary exchanges are there in the country or not. Fifth limitation is externalities. externalities. Externalities are the benefits or harm which is done to the society during a production process by a producer, for which neither the producer is for benefit the producer is not being paid, and for harm which he is doing to the society, he is not getting penalized. So these are known as the externalities, that is benefits for which producer is not getting paid, and for harm for which the producer is not penalized are known as externalities. There are two types of externalities. Point number 1 is positive externality. Positive externalities are those externalities for which is doing benefit to the society, and this benefit is accruing to the society during the production process. So what happens is that due to the productive activity, benefit is being provided to the society, so benefit is increasing, and due to which the welfare of the society will also increase, and for which producer is not paid. So positive externality is the value of the benefits which is given to the society during a production process for which the producer is not being paid. It is known as positive externality. I will give an example. Suppose there is a firm XYZ. This firm produces goods and services, and this firm has planted several trees around its building. Now what will happen? These trees will release oxygen. So trees which have been planted by the firm XYZ are releasing oxygen in the air, and due to which is providing benefits to the society, because if oxygen is there, they will produce more oxygen, then we will inhale pure air, and due to which we will be healthier than before. And for this benefit which we are getting from the productive activity of this firm XYZ, we are not making any payment to the firm. So that means the welfare is increasing, but the value of welfare is not included in the GDP. So that is why GDP does not reflect the welfare which is being caused to the society. So welfare is increasing, but it is not being reflected in the numbers of the GDP. So these are known as the positive externality. So when there is positive externalities are more in the society, in that case GDP is underestimated. Why? Because welfare is more than GDP. Because this welfare is not included in the GDP, however its value should also be included. So that is why when there are more positive externalities in the country, then GDP is underestimated. In the same way, there are one other type of externality which is known as negative externality. Negative externalities are those harm which is caused to the society during a productive activity, and for which the producer is not penalized. He is not making any payment for the penalty. So what happens is that producer produces goods and services, and it causes harm to the society, and due to harm, welfare of the people of the country declines, but the producer does not pay penalty. So this is known as negative externality. I'll give you an example. Suppose there is a firm ABC. Firm is producing goods and services. Now, the chimney of the firm releases lots of harmful gases like CO2, methane, etc. What happens is that when these gases, harmful gases are being released in the atmosphere, they will create air pollution. And when we will inhale that polluted air, we will suffer from several health problems. And we will have to go and get the medical facilities and make the payment for those medical facilities also. That means our welfare, if I am getting sick, my welfare is declining. If in the same way several people are getting sick, so the welfare of several people are declining. However, the producer is not making any payment for the penalty. So that is why the welfare is decreasing. However, its value has not been deducted from the value of GDP. So in this case, GDP is overestimated. That means due to this productive activity, the welfare declines. However, this declination in the welfare is not reflected in the GDP. Therefore, GDP is more than the welfare, value of welfare, and GDP is overestimated. So, that is why it is not possible to measure these externalities, whether it is positive or negative. So that is why, due to this limitation, we can say that GDP is not a correct measure of welfare. If GDP is increasing, we cannot say that welfare of the society is also increasing, because we cannot say that more of the people are getting healthier, or they are getting less healthier, or they are facing some health problems. Next, and the last one is limitation, which we are going to discuss, is population. This is 6th point, population growth. If growth of population is greater than if population, we will write in short, growth is greater than GDP growth, in that case GDP welfare of the people will decline, and GDP will not be able to give the correct measure of the increase in welfare of the people. We'll take an example. Suppose population is in a country is 100. There are 100 persons who are living in a country, and these 100 persons collectively generate national income of rupees 1000. Now, how much a single person or one person is generating? 1000 divided by 100, and this is known as PCI, or per capita income, or the average income of the country. How much one person is per person is earning? So it is rupees 10. Now suppose there is an increase in population. Population then increases to 200 persons. That means how much increase in the population? There is a 100% increase in the population. Now we'll see that there is a increase in GDP and GDP rose to 1100. Now what happened? There is and 1100 is 10% rise in GDP. So when we divide 1100 by 200, the value comes to 5.5. That means on an average, one person is earning 5.5 rupees. Earlier, they were earning on an average rupees 10. So what happened? GDP has been increased. Earlier it was 1000, now it is 1100. But has the welfare of the country, people of the country also increased? No, it has not been, because the income of the people have been decreased to 5.5. That means the welfare has been decreased. So because of this problem, we cannot say that GDP is a correct measure of welfare. If population is growing more than the GDP, in that case welfare will decrease. However, if population will grow less than GDP, then welfare could increase also. Like in case of India, the population growth is 1.1% per year, and the population, however, census data has not been released, and 2011 data, in 2011 the population of India was 121 crores. Now approximately it has been increased to 135 crores. Now what happened is that 135 crores the population is there, and the growth of the GDP was 4.2%. Now 1.1% is less than 4.2%. That means the income of the people is increasing more than the population of the country. So welfare of the people is also increasing. But we cannot check whether other measures, other limitations are there or not, because income gap is also there, gap between rich and poor is also there, and a lot of externalities are there, pollution is also there. So we cannot consider that GDP is a correct measure. Now what happens is that if population is high in a country, so even the GDP is large, then also we cannot say that welfare is there in the country. Like in our country, our GDP was US dollar 2.9 trillion in 2019. Earlier in 2017, it was 2.7 US dollar trillion. That means it was 2018. So our GDP rose from 2.7 trillion to 2.9 trillion. But what happened? This GDP is divided among 135 crore people. So this is the very small amount, which this small amount is being distributed among a large number of people. That is why we cannot say that everyone, the living standard of all the people of the country are high. Now in terms of GDP, as we have already discussed, we are at 5th rank in the world. Earlier in 2018 we were at 7th rank. So we have jumped 2 rank upward. But in case of per capita income, when we divide this income by this population, our per capita income comes to US dollar 2171 thousand. That means in a year, on an average, one Indian earns US dollar 2171, which is very small amount. So in this case, we are at 39th rank in the world, just because of the population. However, we are at the 5th number in terms of GDP, but we are at 139th number in the world in terms of per capita income, because this GDP is being divided or distributed among a large number of people. Now we have taken the example of, we had already discussed the example of US. The GDP of US dollar was 21.4 trillion US dollar. But their population is 32 crore only, 32.9 crore. So what happened? Such a large number is distributed among few people, very few people, because our population was 135 crore almost, and they are at only 32.9 crore. So we have got 103 crore more people in our country. However, our GDP is lot lower than the US. And in per capita income, PCI, they are at 7th rank in the world, and they are earning their PCI is US dollar 65,000, approximately 111, I think. So to be exact, it is 65,111 rupees, which on an average American is earning, and they are at 7th rank in the world. However, India is 139th rank in the world. We discussed about UK. The GDP of UK is around 2.8 trillion US dollar. However, their population is 6.6 crore. So what happened is that and they are at 6th number in terms of GDP in the world. So their rank is 6th, and it is being distributed among a very small number of people, and they are at 21st rank in per capita income. So that is why we know that population also plays an important role in the welfare of the country. If their population is large, the size of the population is large, even if the GDP is large, it will not lead to welfare. However, if the increase in population is less than increase in GDP, some amount of welfare can rise, but it will lead to very less increase in welfare. Since I have given so many ranks, I must give the first rank in PCI, which is Luxembourg. The people of Luxembourg are earning 13 lakh 1,000 something, that is 13 lakh around per year, and that is US dollar. So they stand at first in the world in terms of per capita income. So as we have discussed several limitations of GDP as a measure of welfare. And that's all for today. Thank you so much.